furry fandom is a very welcoming community, a statement that comes accompanied with a very large asterisk. I say this because there's a pretty common misconception that the fandom as a whole accepts anyone with a bit of clout who can draw animal people good. In reality, the fandom is more comparable to a Project Moon-esque city, where every group of furries make up their own little districts amongst other like-minded furries. Some districts are allied, others enemies, some just vibing out, doing their own thing, you get the picture. With the fandom being this group of microcosms mushed together, it should be evident that the welcoming reputation of the community comes not from the fandom as a whole being accepting, but because there will probably be a group within the fandom that you can mesh with well. But what if you don't mesh with any group in the fandom? What if you find yourself at the center of one of these groups before going on to turn that following against you? This video is focused on just such a case. Carpetwurm, who I'll be referring to as Carpet for brevity, is a 23-year-old furry artist who joined the fandom through several furry groups back in 2015. He took up art around this time, but he wouldn't buckle down on the craft until 2016, where he claims the furry groups he was in begged him to draw gay, not safe for work art, something that he would indulge in. Although the first not safe for work artwork documented in his art archive is of the Binding of Isaac for some reason, what followed was that of the gay furry variety, starting with his and others' personas before including Pokemon, both Anthro and Feral. Regardless of the content being depicted, his artwork did objectively improve as the years went on. However, amid that improvement were some not so favorable actions from Carpetwurm, both in regards to himself as well as those around him. In this video, I plan to tell you about those very missteps, and through doing so, hopefully provide you a cautionary tale about the dangers of self-destruction. So with that being said, let's get into it. As stated before, Carpet had started their artistic pursuit in the furry community around 2016, but that pursuit would find itself becoming a bit rocky as he reached the end of 2018. In December, tweets from Carpet would contain complaints about random people uploading his artwork to E621 and sourcing it to only his inkbunny rather than his other social media platforms. In response, a user recommended deleting the inkbunny, but Carpet would say that he couldn't due to it housing one of his largest followings. He was waiting for his newgrounds in Twitter to catch up before doing so. However, he would end up announcing his plan to delete it the following day, saying that he made a journal explaining some of his personal issues with the site and would get harassed for it soon after. A user would respond to this, claiming that Carpetwurm's journal lumped a lot of people using the site as either stupid, brain-dead, criminals, or overall awful people. Carpetwurm replied, saying that he made it completely clear that everything he said was anecdotal. One can only assume that Carpet's journal referred to the majority of users on inkbunny as pedos, as the site is primarily known for its allowance of cub content. But as I couldn't find the journal Carpet posted, this is primarily speculation. However, I was able to come across an archive of his inkbunny profile showing 2 addendums he made to the post. So while I can't see what it actually said, this does at least confirm it happened. But regardless, Carpet would continue to tweet about the response to his inkbunny journal, calling the reaction he received to it toxic, crudely summarizing it as users antagonizing him for criticizing the site. In the end, Carpet would apologize for his rantings about the inkbunny journal, saying he was caught off guard by the shitstorm that came up when I basically just said, "I don't like the sort of people who interact with me on this site." So while I find their conclusion understandable given the usual morals of people indulging in cub porn, I can't say their approach to this was very mature. There's usually not much to be gained when publicly ranting about something that upsets you, unless that rant is accompanied by gameplay footage or is a complete non-issue. And even then, those methods don't exactly garner you much attention when it comes to the furry fandom. And speaking of the furry fandom and publicly ranting, while the furry fandom was where Carpetwurm made a name for himself, he's never really made his dislike of the fandom much of a secret. Now, there's no issue with being vocal about your dislike towards something, especially if it's something you care for. I might have my own furry status occasionally questioned due to seemingly only talking about the negatives of the fandom, but I do want to see members of our fandom carry themselves properly and safely around our fellow members. And what better way to do that than to talk about hot topics in the fandom or show you how not to conduct yourself. It's tough love in the sense that to become better, you have to be made aware of your more detrimental flaws and how to deal with them. But in the case of Carpetwurm, this scorn would result in him voicing his thoughts at the tail end of 2018, around the same time of the inkbunny ordeal. He would tweet about how he regretted getting into drawing furry porn, to the point where he was tempted to draw an upcoming comic with humans rather than furries in an attempt to distance himself from the fandom. Now, this is a pretty understandable stance. Trying to distance yourself from something you did previously can be kinda taxing on the internet. It's something that has to be done and expressed clearly so that your audience knows you're not doing that kind of content any longer. Whether it's a gradual change or a grand announcement, it has to be made clear that the change is happening, why the change is happening, and what that change means for you going forward. That clarity isn't exactly displayed by Carpetwurm at this time. This tweet being made here all pointed towards Carpet revving to leave the furry fandom behind and move on to other ventures, with the responses he received only causing him to double down harder. He'd start out tweeting about how he wasted 2 years of his life in the furry fandom, talking about how he would dig his way out of it, only to then lament about how he was losing followers on Fur Affinity after announcing his determination to leave the furry fandom. This is something that he seems to get hung up on, as he would tweet comments such as, "If anyone here is only sticking around because of the furry stuff, you're gonna be in for a rough time since I'm currently distancing myself from the community." Only to follow that up with, "The number of people unwatching me on FA for drawing what I want to draw really goes to show how fickle the community is, and how not many in it are actually interested in supporting the artists they follow," as he seems to think the people unfollowing him around this time are solely unfollowing because he's drawing what he wants to now. It couldn't have anything to do with him antagonizing anyone following him for sexual furry content specifically, or maybe equating the fandom as a whole to a community full of degenerates who don't even care about his art or growth, because I don't think there are many communities out there who thrive off of their figurehead repeatedly bashing their audience. I'm not saying communities like that don't exist, but looking at the ones that do, well, would you really want to replicate their actions? Now, regardless, that would be how Carpetwurm perceived his loss in following, seeing it as people unfollowing him because he wasn't drawing dog cocks 24/7 as he puts it. As this garnered a pretty sizable mix of both hate and critique, he would voice his complaints about this as well, asking for people to leave him alone and let him do what he wants to do, as he isn't hurting anyone with his opinion on the fandom. This was followed up with a sarcastic, somewhat martyring remark about how he's an evil person for not enjoying the furry community, but still powering through it to draw smut and make people happy. How dare he have the gall to point out that he doesn't like the fandom and doesn't want to be a part of it anymore, failing to realize that this probably isn't the main problem here. That making a transition from furry to human artwork could have been handled much smoother and with much less self-victimization. I do want you to keep the things said in this section in mind, as I believe this moment pretty finely illustrates a theme of what's to come from Carpet's work going forward. A theme of Carpet pushing through the fandom and creating smut not for his own enjoyment, but because he feels as if he has to do it. This would be evident as he continued production on a furry porn game he was previously working on. Along with artwork, Carpetwurm had also taken up the endeavor of creating a furry porn game in an attempt to prove the extent of his skills. After working on it for quite some time, Carpet had stopped work on the game as his relationship with porn became hazy. However, in 2020, he would resume production on the game, aiming to finish it. He claims that although this wasn't fulfilling nor making him happy, given his recent distaste for porn, that he felt he had an obligation to finish the game for his followers and for his own sake of just getting it over with. Carpet picking back up production to prove what he's capable of does make sense, seeing that a few days later, Tailbound's predecessor named Thirstchasm received a critical comment on E621 due to the janky controls, according to this user. From Carpet's perspective, this would be seen as shitty comments from shitty people. He saw this as hate against him, saying that those calling the comment criticism should notice that Thirstchasm is over 2 years old, and that none of his current projects house the same level of jank, which confuses me. He took this user saying the game was janky as an attack, yet he himself acknowledges the game as a janky prototype made in less than a month. How is it a shitty comment if you're acknowledging his point is justified? Did they just not word it nice enough? So while you could argue that comments such as these made Carpet want to better his craft to prove the haters wrong with his later projects, it was also evident that criticism such as this would demotivate Carpet, instead making him want to get it over with so people would stop pestering him about not finishing games. This could be proven in another tweet made in August 2020, where Carpet appeared to be having a breakdown over comments critical of his game development, stating that he was depressed and wanted Tailbound to be done and over with for people to leave him alone regarding the game's development status. Later on, Carpet's boyfriend, a fursuiter by the name of Poco, had suffered the unfortunate loss of his father, causing both Carpet and Poco to move out to the deceased father's home to take care of Poco's mother during this time of grieving. This would lead to the game's launch being delayed, being pushed from its original aim of May 2021 to August or September of that same year. In a developer post, Carpet would detail this loss as one of the reasons for Tailbound's delay, saying that it was a huge blow to his own morale. He details how it's taken quite a lot of mental gymnastics and psyching himself up to see Tailbound is worth completing, as he claims none of his friends like to encourage him on anything he does. Through these mental gymnastics, Carpetwurm realized that a lot of his work follows the same cycle of working on something, posting about it online, getting some positive reception about it, and then abandoning that project once another idea comes along. He came to the conclusion that Tailbound wasn't a project he would be able to continue that cycle with, meaning that he needed to see this project out to the end, so he would do just that, although that wouldn't stop him from occasionally voicing the disdain he had when it came to unfinished projects of his. Following this post, a closed beta of the game would be released on August of 2021, the month he previously said would be when the game was completed. He would end up missing the September deadline he set for its release, instead releasing a public beta in October while development would silently continue until March of 2022. In another devlog on itch.io, Carpet stated that the game was finished but was lacking when it came to a proper soundtrack and sound effects. He states that he isn't a composer or sound effects producer himself, and claims that the 3 previous people he hired in regards to those parts had ghosted him. Although I can't prove or disprove this, given there appears to be no public receipts available telling one story or the other. Along with this, he also stated that he no longer planned to continue any work on the game after his separation from not safe for work content, stating that he hasn't drawn a single dick or ass in the last 6 months. Regardless of this update post, however, Tailbound would see a 1.0 release on April 11th of 2022, just a few weeks later. In this post announcing its release, he states that the previous post did get interest from several composers, but they all ultimately gave up on the project. In response to this roadblock, he decided that the best solution would be to acquire music from Open Game Art, a royalty-free video game asset repository. At the end of the post, he says that he's more or less happy with the result of what he's created, but this is followed by another jab toward his critics, providing more evidence to claim that Carpet finished Tailbound to prove the hater wrong, as now they were unable to say he abandoned this project. He would end it off by saying, "I'll leave it to Coomers who haven't seen the sun in 20 years to find ways to continue calling the game unfinished. Thanks for your time and support. It's been real." This statement is funnily enough juxtaposed against very positive comments underneath, not a single derogatory one in sight. From what I could see, the game didn't find itself getting much negative reception until Carpetwurm would get the game onto Steam in September of 2022, and even then, those negative reviews are overshadowed by overall positive reception. Despite what Carpet thought of his audience, people enjoyed the game for its not safe for work content as well as the gameplay, which, while more in depth in comparison to most porn games available, was essentially a link to the past with sex scenes, allowing others to enjoy the retro aesthetic and nostalgia it gave off. Now granted, the positive reception can be somewhat deceiving, as when it comes to Steam reviews, you will encounter a bit of selection bias, as obviously the people who would purchase and play this game are going to either be those in Carpet's audience, or those looking for a porn game to play rather than those with no previous exposure to Carpet or this genre of game. It's similar to how the majority of Pokemon fans enjoyed Sword and Shield, despite the general audiences of the game holding a more critical opinion towards it. Looking at the negative reviews of the game, the majority didn't really tackle the game itself. Some players did, ironically enough, complain that the game was slightly janky, but the majority were instead jabs at Carpet for bigoted statements he made. Statements that we're going to get into in just a moment. Moving into 2023, Carpet would tweet a post in March that didn't bode too well with most who came across it. It would read, "I wish I could be a furry without seeing art glorifying homosexual relationships. The best/only alternative is art objectifying women. Amazing." It was then followed with, "This site is designed for user suffering," followed by a screenshot where his tweet is below artwork displaying gay pride in his feed. As expected, this would see Carpet at odds with a number of Twitter bystanders, as well as a chunk of his own followers who, given his past work, you can assume would be gay. It essentially came off as Carpet saying that there was some sort of imbalance between straight and LGBT people in the fandom, which, needless to say, it didn't bode over all too well. It's not like gay and lesbian furries are willing the straight ones out of existence, so why would that perceived imbalance be an issue when either side doesn't impede on one another? While it can be assumed Carpet continued replying to users to expand his thoughts further, it wouldn't be until the start of April that Carpet would commit what most at the time saw as career suicide. On April 2nd, Carpet would post a 2-page summary of his life events, captioning the tweet by saying, "Long-ass summary of my life events leading me to where I'm at today. Since I know it can be confusing for people who are ever so invested in my life while simultaneously being oblivious to the fact I quit Not Safe for Work years ago." He says this regardless of the fact he's created Not Safe for Work artwork over the years he's referring to, even releasing a Not Safe for Work video game months before this point. So I think it's fair that some people would be oblivious to this, given that what he did was the equivalent of quitting a job, continuing to work there, and getting mad that people think you still work there. Anyway, the summary itself gives a relatively similar run-through of what we've covered so far. Save for his mentions of family life and his upbringing, he goes in depth with his past relationship with Poco in 2018, listing off red flags he found in their relationship over the next 4 years. Red flags such as a dwindling sex drive, feeling uncomfortable telling people he was gay, and being completely reliant on his partner while LARPing as a submissive femboy housewife. Reaching 2023, he would write how he relegated Not Safe for Work artwork to private activities or private commissions, as he would begin reading the Bible and taking its teachings to heart. Instead of locking himself in a similar relationship to the one he just left, he would devote himself to the Lord and be fruitful, something that in his words would get him mobbed by homosexual teenagers for being homophobic. On the same day, soon after posting this, all of Carpetwurm's artwork would be removed from E621 by his request. This would garner a pretty noticeable reaction as users on Twitter would point out how an artist in the fandom who grew a following through gay porn would suddenly turn on their homosexual fans, even feeling the need to incorrectly make a reference to trans suicide rates while saying that he'd wish the gay people following him would leave him alone. So, in his pursuit of moving on from a relationship he perceived as toxic, he would not only swear off making any public Not Safe for Work for the umpteenth time through purging it off of V6, but he would also antagonize the homosexual and transgender portions of his audience. You know, the primary chunk of his audience. The chunk of his audience that probably monetarily supported the projects he was working on. Now it comes off to them that he was just using that chunk as a stepping stool, since now his sights were set on both finding God and his ideal trad wife, the latter being something that wouldn't take him too long to do. fuzzywolfdog, or Wendy, was a member of the Furry Fandom who took interest in Carpetwurm, the two soon becoming a couple in early April. However, this relationship would be short-lived, as a month later, on May 11th, Wendy had made a post stating that she was cheated on by Carpetwurm with another furry known as Rabies Redneck. Rabies being somewhat of an infamous name due to being the stereotype of a terminally online right-winger. This claim was accompanied by a Discord screenshot of Carpetwurm telling Wendy that he was emotionally cheating on her with rabies. The following day, Carpetwurm would post an imager link on Twitter with various screenshots that showcase his side of events, alluding to Wendy being a terrible person and partner. Now, I won't be going through this for this video, as personally I don't feel it's right to share the experience and reasons why Carpet and Wendy broke up, as not only does it come off as ambiguous here, but I don't feel comfortable sharing a singular side when it comes to these allegations, especially given what's happened to Wendy's response. A response that she had uploaded on June 6th, a Google document detailing her claims against Carpetwurm, a Google document that would mysteriously get taken down. And given I'm unable to locate an archive of it, her side is essentially gone with the wind. Although, in the imager dump, Carpetwurm gives an account on how he met Rabies, which is as follows. The day prior to the breakup, Carpet met Rabies over Discord, Carpet describing him as a Twitter Nazi first shitpost mutual. After getting relationship advice from Rabies, Carpet had decided to break things off with Wendy. Regardless, this situation caused yet another schism within Carpet's following. People were upset at both the lack of respect Carpet showed towards his partner, as well as his cheating on Wendy. The latter was only made worse due to the newer members of his audience finding issues with him not only cheating on Wendy, but also going on to do so with a gay man after announcing his return to Christianity. Overall, a number of people had sympathized with Wendy in this situation, ultimately leading to Carpet looking worse for having gone through this ordeal. The reason I'm bringing this up is because of it being another situation in which Carpet simply dug his online reputation even deeper. This continued pattern of victimizing both his audience and critics is why I consider Carpetwurm to be a nomad of the fandom, as he's created so many schisms and cracks in his own district that it's hardly inhabitable. In fact, I'd even argue that those who follow him for his content nowadays are either unaware of his history, due to him wiping it all and operating under the new alias of Kitran, or the more likely option, they're simply masters of separating art from the artist. This being a point I based off of Twitter metrics alone, but the point still stands. Even in the furry fandom, Carpet has managed to exhaust and burn down a multitude of bridges he's made in the fandom, each occurrence coming with its own assorted reasons that still manage to confuse me regardless of taking the time here to lay out what happened. That being said, there is still a question that's bothered me going through all this. Back in 2018, he already made it quite clear he dislikes interacting with the fandom and he would leave it when he chose. But look 5 years later and he's still here. He just spent that time here antagonizing the very groups that supported what he did at the time. Instead of expressing his discontent with his current position in the fandom and working towards the position he wanted, he instead antagonized the very people who gave him a platform, got frustrated when that very platform started to crumble due to a loss in support, and instead of addressing the cracks, he just continued forward without a care. I suppose in his defense, I guess he did say he'd dig his way out of the furry community. In a way, he's kinda doing that. Slowly but surely. But that just brings me back to the question of why. Why villainize homosexuals in your path to godhood, swearing off public not safe for work art, only to go back to drawing gay furry porn publicly afterwards? The only thing I can really point to is, well, money. I mean, he did grind quite a bit when it came to his artwork back in 2016, so I guess it would make sense that today, regardless of the bridges he's burnt, regardless of the drama he's been both part and player of, no matter how scorched the earth of his district is, he's sticking with gay furry smut because he'd either had an epiphany and learned the error of his ways, or it's just for money. And speaking of money, if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing and supporting my Patreon.
Funding for this program was made possible by